Welcome back, my friends. Today on the channel, let's do another question and answer video. Once a month on the community tab, my YouTube channel, I'll put out a question prompt such as this one. Down below, you can ask me anything about anything. Read each other's questions, thumbs up the ones you want me to respond to. I'll respond to as many as I can in this video. The cutoff was 50 thumbs up. So here's the most liked question from Chris Dunford. One of the most baffling things to me as a Brit is how can one man, Speaker Johnson, hold the entire US democracy for ransom by not scheduling a vote for continued aid for Ukraine, especially as the majority of both parties are in favor? Why can't they just go around him? So Article 1, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution states, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress. The framers of our Constitution, James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, they wanted Congress and the legislative branch to be Article 1, Section 1, because it was supposed to be the most important and the most powerful. And for most of U.S.'s history, Congress was more powerful than the presidency. It's only in recent history, since World War I and World War II, that the executive branch and the president has become more powerful. And in the Constitution, the House of Representatives shall choose their speaker and other officers. So the House makes its own rules. And I don't know when this happens, but probably 100 years ago, the House decided that the Speaker would set the agenda, and that only the Speaker basically can advance any bill or allow a vote on any issue. And the reason why is because a lot of members of Congress are kind of crazy. They're showboaters, they're narcissists. Congressman George Santos was charged with fraud, money laundering, theft of public funds, and false statements. This guy was just expelled from Congress this week. And there are 435 members of the House of Representatives. So if any of them could schedule a vote on something, they all would be doing it. It would be chaos and disorder. And maybe you're saying, well, why not just let the leader of the minority party, perhaps, also be able to schedule a vote? Then whoever was in the minority would be doing this every day to try and make the majority look bad. So this is a rule that's in place just for simplicity, so that the House of Representatives, with all these hundreds of people, is not just completely in chaos all the time. But there is checks and balances. And the check on the party in the majority, the check on the Speaker of the House, is the fact that we have an election every 2 years. Every member of the House of Representatives is up for re-election every 2 years. So if the majority and the Speaker abuses their power, well, if Americans are unhappy with this, we're having an election in 331 days. If you're unhappy with how the Republicans are choosing to use their power by blocking military aid to our allies around the world, by not defending democracy around the world, then you don't have to vote for a Republican. If the Democrats can just gain 4 or 5 seats, they'll be in the majority. They'll schedule a vote on aid for Ukraine, and we can resolve this issue in 2025. Not a good answer, just explaining to you why it is the way it is. Hey Jake, I'd love to know the difference between U.S. aid and the treaty obligations of the U.S. and Britain signed back in 1994 to defend Ukraine. Love your work. So I assume if you're speaking about 1994, you're speaking of the Budapest Memorandum. And I have some bad news for you. This is not a treaty. This has no enforcement or standing in American law. A memorandum is basically an executive signing. President Bill Clinton in the 90s signed this. He was the one that negotiated with the Russians and the Ukrainians. And when he left office, this basically lost all significance or enforcement. Not a good answer, but there are no legal obligations from the United States to Ukraine under the Budapest Memorandum. Congress never debated this. Congress never voted on it. It feels like a cruel trick that was played on the Ukrainians to give up their nukes. But the 90s was a different era. Communism had just been defeated. The Russians were reforming, opening up. There was a very strong belief, even from the Russians, that they would change and that Ukraine's borders and their sovereignty would be respected. As soon as Putin got into office, obviously he had no intention of ever honoring any of these agreements. So unfortunately, President Biden and Prime Minister Sunak don't talk about the Budapest Memorandum because it has no legal standing in either of our countries. Makes us look bad. Countries in the future will be less likely to go into agreements when the United States doesn't back up what they promised 30 years ago. Next question. Can you please remind your American viewers that they can call their representatives and demand aid for Ukraine, as it's also a matter of security for the United States? If you're American and watching this video, please contact your representatives. You can Google how to contact my U.S. representative. You'll get a website where you can enter your zip code. You can then find your congressperson and how to contact them. My representative is the Democrat Dina Titus. She supports Ukraine. It's also nice to still contact them anyways and thank them for supporting Ukraine. My senators are Catherine Cortez Masto and Jackie Rosen, both Democrats here in Nevada. Both of these senators support Ukraine, so if you're American and you're currently being represented by a Republican in Congress, then yes, it's very important that you email them, call them, send them a letter, and let them know it's important to support Ukraine and support democracy around the world. Next question. Israel has been given military aid since Hamas attacked on October 7th without Congress budgeting it. Seems like Israel has other systems set in place for aid. How can Ukraine get aid without the U.S. Congress? So I want to share this article from January of 2023. U.S. quietly shipping ammo to Ukraine from massive stockpile in Israel. New York Times says 300 artillery shells to be sent to Kyiv's forces from American supplies kept in Israel for emergency use. So some of this aid and artillery shells being sent to Israel is probably backfilling this stockpile that was taken to be sent to Ukraine last year. I don't think when stuff is shuffled around like this that the president needs to get approval from Congress. And I do want to highlight that I'm sure Vladimir Putin knew this. The Russians, and specifically the Wagner Group, were offering training and intelligence to Hamas to instigate this attack on October 7th, with the goal of distracting America and diverting resources from Ukraine back to Israel, back to the Middle East. Aside from this, there's something called the Presidential Drawdown Authority. The PDA is to direct a drawdown of military assistance under the Foreign Assistance Act. So every year, the president has a pool of money, a couple billion, 7 or 8 billion. And the president, at his own discretion, can give this in military aid to anyone he wants in an emergency. If there's a crisis happening somewhere in the world, we don't have time Congress might not be in session. So the president is given a certain amount of money every year to allocate to emergencies. Israel has been getting military assistance from the United States, and my guess is that this is where this is coming from, the Presidential Drawdown Authority under the Foreign Assistance Act. The second part to your question about Ukraine, yes, this money can also be used for Ukraine. My guess, this is what President Biden is planning on using for 2024 if congressional Republicans continue to block additional military aid for Ukraine. Next question, if Ukraine can recapture Crimea, will that open up a significant pool of able-bodied and motivated Ukrainians to fight for them? You might not like this answer, but I don't think so. If you're an 18, 19, or 20-year-old man living in Crimea, then you were 8, 9, or 10 when Russia annexed Crimea. Older people remember what life was like when Ukraine controlled Crimea. But for the younger guys, they've been living in occupied territory, absorbing Russian propaganda for a decade. So these people don't identify with Ukraine. They probably don't speak Ukrainian. These are the military-age men that would be most useful for joining the Ukrainian military. So if Ukraine can have a significant breakthrough and get to the peninsula, kick the Russians out, there's going to be a period of de-Russification to counter the decade of propaganda that these people have been absorbing. Are there older people who know the truth and who are waiting to be liberated? Absolutely. But unfortunately for the children, for the younger people, they've been getting it pretty heavy from Russian propaganda for a decade, and it's probably going to take some time for them to snap out of it. Why don't we hear about Belarus anymore? Are they out of the game? I hope they're out of the game. In my opinion, Belarus this entire time has been a non-factor, but Russia was really playing it up, pretending like Belarus's military was going to attack Ukraine from the north, try and go for Lviv or something crazy. I never gave this theory any respect because Belarus is a suburb of Moscow. The Russians control it, and Belarus has no military capacity beyond what Russia allows them. If the Russian military is struggling, yeah, Belarus can lend some bodies, but what additional military power can Belarus offer? And it's not a whole lot. The population of Belarus is less than 1/4 the population of Ukraine. And Belarus, I think aside from Moldova, is the poorest country in Europe. They don't have any natural resources. Their economy is a joke. The Russians prop them up. And as soon as Russia starts to wobble, Belarus is going to fall first. And I'm sure Lukashenko knows this. He's the most successful dictator of the last 30 years, really. Kudos to this guy for remaining in power and having a strong grip on the people of Belarus, but his fate is tied to Russia. And I'm sure he's pretty annoyed because Putin sold to him that this would be a 3-day special military operation. He allowed the Russians to build up on Belarusian territory. That thunder run to Kyiv, they were supposed to take the capital city, but this is going to end badly for Lukashenko and Belarus. Hopefully, there will be a transition period and Belarus can become a functioning democracy and perhaps someday even join the EU and NATO. The people of Belarus will then finally have peace and prosperity, and they can get rid of their old Soviet form of government corruption. Will the Kerch Bridge be destroyed before Christmas? Zelensky said something big would happen before the new year. Thanks, Jake. I do think Ukraine has attempted to destroy the Kerch Bridge in the last 2 or 3 months, since the repairs on the passenger lanes were completed. But I think these attempts have failed, and when Ukraine fails to do something, when a missile or drone gets shot down, or when a ski boat is destroyed, more than likely we're not going to hear about it. But the Kerch Bridge is a huge problem. Ukraine does need to bring this down somehow. And I'm sure they're working on it. I'm sure they're trying to come up with a strategy or a plan. Once again, failed attempts probably don't make the news. And Ukraine probably was hoping, with their summer counteroffensive, to make it to the coastline to the Sea of Azov, and then all they have to do is fire some missiles over the water. I'm sure Russia has multiple layers of air defense near the bridge, as well as layers of air defense in the Zaporizhia region to protect the bridge. It's the number one priority for Russia to defend. That's why it hasn't been brought down yet. Can it be brought down at any moment? Yeah. I think Ukraine is working on a strategy to eliminate Russian air defense and overload Russia's air defenses, but they'll get it eventually. How much better equipped is Ukraine to take on Russia's winter strikes of Ukraine's energy infrastructure than they were last year? I think this was asked in my last Q&A, but here's a hypothetical map from Ukraine Battle Map showing where all of Ukraine's air defense systems potentially could be. Nobody knows where exactly they're located, but this is a best guess. Currently, Ukraine has 3 Patriot air defense systems, 1 SAM PT. I do think Ukraine is getting their 4th Patriots this month, so it could potentially be placed, maybe near Odessa. 44 books, 4 NASAMS, 4 IRIS-Ts. Germany promised more IRIS-Ts. Other countries have promised more NASAMS. It's been a long process to get to this point, but this winter is nothing like last winter. Russia is not going to be able to repeat their drone and missile attacks to the same level of success. 2 weeks ago, I think this was the end of November, Russia did launch a massive drone strike on Kyiv, probably to test how good it was. And I think 1 drone hit a kindergarten, but everything else was successfully intercepted and shot down. So we're almost halfway through December, and Russia's not repeating what they did last year. And the hope is they're not attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure because they think Ukraine's air defense systems are just too good. Hey Jake, we are currently seeing stormy times in American politics. Can the American society find ways to provide military resources outside of politics, such as private purchases? And can the core EU compensate for the lack of aid? The Europeans have been fantastic when it comes to financial and humanitarian aid, but as far as military aid, the United States has provided more than every other country combined. For Ukraine to successfully go on the offensive and liberate their territory, I don't see how they can do this without the United States continuing their current level of military aid and assistance. So if the Republicans block further military aid, I definitely think with contracts and private defense contractors, sure, if Germany or the UK wants to purchase Bradley infantry fighting vehicles and donate them to Ukraine, I'm sure that's possible, but most military assistance is countries giving stuff from their own stockpiles and then purchasing more from their own defense industry. Everyone does this to protect their own defense sector, generate jobs in their own country, tax revenue such as that. So I don't know what additional capacity defense contractors in France, the UK, or Germany can do beyond what they're currently at. The level of material and resources just being expended in this war is beyond what Europe is capable of providing to Ukraine, unfortunately. So the United States has to stay engaged, has to stay involved. Defense contractors here in America need to keep getting the orders. And stuff from our own stockpile needs to be sent to Ukraine. I'm extremely worried about American funding. Can you see it drying up? My wife is Ukrainian and my children. I have a huge interest. So at the moment, Republicans in Congress are blocking any additional military aid to Ukraine. They say they want border security, but what they really want is immigration reform. Border security sounds good. Who's going to oppose that? But immigration here in the United States has been broken for over 40 years, my entire life. No Congress, no party, and no president in 40 years has secured the southern border or successfully reformed our immigration policy. So for congressional Republicans to demand that it be done this month in a single vote or Ukraine gets nothing is irresponsible. And if we look at clips on Kremlin state TV, Russian state TV is pleased with Republicans for blocking aid to Ukraine. There's only one solution. I'm going to keep repeating this. If you support Ukraine, and to you it's the most important political issue, then we're having an election on November 5th. If you can show up and support only candidates who are willing to defend democracy around the world, then perhaps in 2025 Ukraine can get the necessary military aid in order to liberate their people and liberate their territory. I find myself having to defend Ukraine in conversations with people and my own family when trying to express how important our support is in this war. What are some good talking points and how do you try to explain this? I'm almost to the point where I feel like I should go to Ukraine because my own country won't do the right thing. I don't know how anyone can, one, support Russia or be indifferent about the people of Ukraine suffering and dying. If you want to show them before and after pictures of the city of Mariupol, the Russians destroyed more than 90% of the civilian buildings in the city. They killed tens of thousands of people. Currently is kidnapping children and taking them back to Russia and wiping their identities, changing their names, changing their birth dates, giving them to families in remote Siberia, so that Ukraine can never find these children again. This is the definition of a genocide. It's codified in the Geneva Conventions. When you steal children and erase their identity, that is a genocide. And there's videos online of the Russian military going into orphanages in Kherson and taking away the children. Men in military uniforms with machine guns, picking up babies and taking them away. I don't know how anyone can think this is okay. You can also talk about war crimes, such as what happened in Bucha. The pictures and videos online are horrifying. This is what Russia did to civilians in the first week or two. This wasn't even really before Ukrainian resistance strengthened. This is how the Russians came into the country. This is the level of brutality that they were showing civilians on day one. I don't know how we can't learn the lessons of history. I guess World War II was so long ago now that people are forgetting how it ends when dictators march their armies across Europe. Usually doesn't end well for anyone. And then there's also YouTube channels such as Russian Media Monitor. Every day on Kremlin State TV, they say stupid and evil things, and you can just watch these clips and listen to the Russians themselves saying they're going to take their army all the way to Portugal, that they're fine using nuclear weapons, that the Ukrainian language and the Ukrainian identity doesn't really exist. These are the kinds of evil and crazy things they say on government TV every day. I don't know. If the USA stops funding or starts underfunding arms to Ukraine, what are the alternatives? Could allies start buying US arms with loans, for example? I believe where there is a will, there is a way. President Biden is still going to do everything he can, limited by laws here in the United States. But yes, I mean, defense contractors here in the United States are private companies. Anybody that wants to place an order with Lockheed Martin or General Dynamics or Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, they can do so. To highlight this, we just found out this week that the second largest provider of artillery shells to Ukraine is actually South Korea. South Korea has a really strong defense sector, and apparently they're capable of producing a lot of 155 millimeter NATO standard artillery shells. So there's solutions out there if there's the money, and hopefully if Republicans in Congress don't want to allocate any more money, other countries and other organizations can step up until we can get a change in Congress. And if we're being realistic, and I know some people don't want me to say this, I don't think Ukraine militarily is going to defeat Russia in 2024. They simply don't have the resources, and Russia is still producing. Russia is still resupplying. Russia is still convincing Russian men to sign contracts. Russian men are still accepting conscription and mobilization and being sent to Ukraine. So Ukraine's going to need some help, and they're going to need some luck from inside Russia. We need Russia to politically or economically collapse so their military can't continue. And this is very possible. I just picked up a book this week, 10 Days That Shook the World by John Reed, talking about the 1917 Russian Revolution. I can always learn a little bit more about Russian history. I also want to read a book talking about the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 90s. If any society could collapse, it's the Russians. They've already done it twice in the last 100 years. So keep applying pressure, keep draining their resources, sanctions have to hold. Russia's eventually going to run out of money, and nobody is going to loan them money when they're obviously losing a war. Russia, part of the reason why they've collapsed twice in the last century, just has terrible geography. It's very cold and very dark most of the year, and it's hard to control the Eurasian steppes in peacetime. If you're an army marching across in wartime, it's really easy because their territory is flat and open. But to govern this territory is very difficult because, as you can see from their river system, most of their rivers flow north into the Arctic Ocean, not a direction you want to go. So to get around and to move around, Russia's best option, the cheapest, is railway. And if Ukraine can continue sabotaging rail lines, tunnels, and bridges, this is going to cause huge problems for the Russians. The next best way is airplanes. And every day in the news, we hear of a new Russian aviation disaster, a plane having to make an emergency landing, Russia is flying a fleet of stolen planes when they can't get parts and maintenance legitimately. So as their rail and airline industry is sabotaged or blocked, I do believe Russia eventually will fracture. The people in these regions are sick of this war already, but they still fear the Kremlin more than the alternative, just going it alone, declaring independence and revolting. It's very possible, it is likely in my opinion. We just need more time. That's going to be it for this question and answer. If you made it this far in the video, you're incredible. Thank you to everyone who submitted a question or read other people's questions. Thank you to all my channel members and Patreon supporters. You guys are the best. Till next month when we do this again, take care everyone.